If you love iPhone, you'll love Apple Card. It comes with the privacy and security you expect from Apple. Plus, you earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, which can automatically earn interest when you open a high-yield savings account through Apple Card. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app, subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Apple Card and Savings by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com. If you love iPhone, you'll love Apple Card. It comes with the privacy and security you expect from Apple. Plus, you earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, which can automatically earn interest when you open a high-yield savings account through Apple Card. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app, subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Apple Card and Savings by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com.
You're listening to Well Now, Slate's podcast on health and wellness. I'm Maya Feller.
And I'm Kavita Patel. Puberty is changing, and we don't mean developing Adam's apples and growing hair in new places. For many youth, it's beginning earlier and lasting longer. This stage of life is challenging for both children and their parents, and it's becoming even more complex as we see children entering this phase earlier than ever before.
That's right, Kavita. And when we talk about puberty, it's important to remember that it's a natural and necessary part of growing up. It's the process that transitions a child's body into an adult body capable of reproduction. For many girls, one of the first signs of puberty include growing breasts, while for boys, it's growing testicles. Currently, puberty is said to start between the ages of 8 to 13 for girls and 9 to 14 for boys. Not only is this a wide range, it's considerably younger than in decades prior. It's important to understand what's driving this change and what it means for our kids' health. But first things first, Kavita, let's talk about our experiences. Okay, so I kind of want you to hold on to your seat, Kavita, because you know that I grew up in this house that was led by two women, so a lesbian home. And there was a lot of conversation about puberty because it was a women's home. So when I got my first period, there was a party and there was a cake and there was a new outfit. And every woman in my mother's circle sat around and talked about their puberty experiences. I mean, it was probably the healthiest way that I experienced it. And I felt fairly good about my changing body because of the home that my mother's created. Kavita, what are some of your memories of puberty?
Well, my memories were all of trying to get information by observing my peers. I had probably the opposite of your home environment, so to speak, where we didn't talk about anything like that. And the most education I got, frankly, was after I had already gone through puberty and I read Anita Diamant's book, The Red Tent. And I thought, oh yeah, I wish I had had this or some 12-year-old version of that when I was going through, I think, what the worst stages of puberty are for every girl, which is getting their period. I think that initial period and all the emotions around it are the things that I remember better than anything. And I think even now to this day, it's one of the few questions I can ask a woman and say, when did you first get your period? As a medical question. And even more so than people remembering when they might have had sex or when they might have ovulated leading to a pregnancy, people can remember when they got their periods, and almost to a day, to a person, to a year. And I think that's why it has this indelible impact on people and why our experiences are, for myself, I cringed away from it. So when I had a daughter, I have a son and a daughter, as you know, I thought, oh gosh, I'm going to have to figure out how to not screw this up the way I felt like my family avoided talking to me about the periods. And then I, in turn, really want to make sure that she understands all of this, including changes to her body, are normal. The good news is that children are now talking about it and having more experience about it. And I hope that while many of us didn't feel ready for puberty when it happened to us in our teens, there's something to be said for Also teaching early, and it's because we know that precocious puberty is real and it's worrisome. According to researchers at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the average age of puberty onset in girls has been dropping by about 3 months every decade over the last 40 years. This dropped the median age of puberty beginning from 10 and a half years old to 9 and a half since the 1980s. Maya, while it might not seem like that's a lot, that's a pretty tectonic shift in what's happening in biology. Researchers and physicians point to several factors driving this trend, including obesity, the environment, and exposure to endocrine-disrupting chemicals found in plastics, like personal care products and even food packaging. We also have to factor in stress, and especially for this generation of youth, we cannot overlook the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Several studies have reported an increase in new diagnoses of precocious puberty during and after at-home orders were in place. The pandemic brought about significant lifestyle changes, increased screen time, reduced physical activity, and heightened stress levels. All of these factors may have contributed to the acceleration of puberty in some children, and early puberty can have significant health consequences, including metabolic ones. Maya, what are your thoughts? And I know this is not just about precocious puberty, it's really about puberty in general. But just listening to that, what are your thoughts? What have you seen in your professional or personal experience?
Kavita, it brought back a memory of when I was at NYU Pediatric Dental Clinic doing my rotations. And so dietitians, we have to do a rotation in dentistry because digestion begins in the mouth. And there was one day that was a free service day. And the free service day, Kavita, was just children from everywhere in New York City. And I remember talking to the head of the dental clinic and saying, hey, I noticed that these kids' charts, it says that they're 9. They look like they're 15. So tall, completely developed. And it was my firsthand experience seeing it, but over and over and over again. And I use that example because that was the free day. Most of the people that were presenting looking older, so I guess having a older body bone age than their chronological age, were from Black and Latina backgrounds. And there was definitely a socioeconomic factor combined with it. And the truth is that I don't actually see it getting any better. And I don't mean to be a downer, but I am acutely aware that when you read those statistics out, it's true. This is what's happening, right? When we're talking about endocrine disrupting chemicals, and when we're talking about the quantity of plastic and packaging and what we're just exposed to environmentally, it gives me a lot of pause. And whether it's precocious or not, I mean, puberty is incredibly difficult for parents and children to navigate. And I'll say this, actually, from a personal perspective, I remembered that my mom's gave me this book, Our Bodies Ourselves, I think just to go through and read. And then there was a book, a period book. And I did the same for my daughter as well. However, not everyone's having these discussions. And I can say that in her friend group, there are some kids who have had their first periods. You're totally right around 9 and a half. It is a very different landscape.
It really is, Maya, and it underscores, I think, the importance of addressing this issue and supporting children and their families, regardless of when it occurs. I think it's also not just one moment in time. So we have to acknowledge that it takes years, and as you and I know, that biology of puberty has such an effect decades later, which is why we're talking about it.
Exactly, which is why after the break, I'm going to speak with someone who's made it her mission to remove the shame and stigma around this necessary part of growing up. Stay tuned. Hey, Wellnow listeners, if you're enjoying the show and want to hear more, subscribe to our feed. New episodes come out every Wednesday morning. While you're there, check out our other episodes too, like last week's about bringing a whole child model into children's nutrition with pediatric dietitian Jill Castle. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
If you love iPhone, you'll love Apple Card. It comes with the privacy and security you expect from Apple. Plus, you earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, which can automatically earn interest when you open a high-yield savings account through Apple Card. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app, subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Apple Card and Savings by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com.
Have you thought about a gift for yourself this year? Give yourself the gift of language by getting Babbel. So this winter, I'm thinking about going to Europe with my family, and I know wherever we go will not be a direct flight. That means I'm going to stop over in a place where I do not speak the language. And I plan to use Babbel to help me learn some conversational phrases like, may I please have a cup of coffee? Or I'd love to have a sandwich. Why, thank you. And those sorts of things. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you talking a new language in 3 weeks. Babbel's tips and tools are inspired by the real-life stuff you'll actually need when talking. With a focus on conversation, you'll be ready to talk wherever you go. Here's a special holiday deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/wellnow. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/wellnow. Spelled BABBEL.com/wellnow. Rules and restrictions may apply. Welcome back. You're listening to Well Now. I'm Maya Feller. Here to talk about the highs, the lows, and the in-betweens of puberty is Vanessa Kroll Bennett. She's a puberty educator, writer, and co-host of the podcast This Is So Awkward with Dr. Cara Natterson. They both released a book under the same name, This Is So Awkward, Modern Puberty Explained. Vanessa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I can't wait for this conversation. So before we get started, there's a question that we usually ask all of our guests. And it's not a trick question, but it's meant to help us get a little bit of information or insight. How do you, Vanessa, define wellness?
Wow, that is quite a question. I've been asked a lot of things in my time. I think wellness is not just a physical thing. It's not just an emotional thing. It's not just a relational thing. It's kind of this big, beautiful, complex canopy of lots of different threads coming together so that people feel not happy, because sometimes wellness doesn't make us happy, like when we have to go work out and we don't want to work out, but we know we have to work out, or as my kids would say when I make them eat their vegetables. But it makes us feel strong. It makes us feel alive. It makes us feel the ability to focus and to do the things in our lives that we want to do. And to me, wellness is a lot about feeling connected to other people. I know that's not true for everyone, but for me, that's an important part of feeling well.
Vanessa, I love that, especially given that we're in this loneliness epidemic. The ability to be connected to community, that is also so important for me. I appreciate that you brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we work so much with parents and trusted adults of kids who are in the tween and teen years. And we talk a lot, Maya, actually, about how lonely that road can be for the adults, because we really try to respect the privacy of the kids that we're caring for. Sometimes they don't make the best decisions in school or in their relationships or in how they care for themselves. So it's not stuff we want to disclose to other people. And it is really lonely. And so at a time when people are generally feeling kind of lonely, we hope that the adults we talk to are finding connection and finding community for themselves so that they feel less lonely.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting, the way that you describe the work with both the adult and the kids that you take care of. What inspired you to become a puberty educator and then also focus on that particular stage of development?
So my work started with a company called Dynamo Girl, and I created it over a decade ago. And the intention was to use sports and physical activity coupled with social emotional learning to help build girls' self-esteem. We were seeing all the data come in that said girls' self-esteem peaks at age 9 and precipitously declines. And at the time, my daughter was like 3. And I thought, well, I don't want that future for her. I want her to feel confident throughout life. So I started to design a program. I used tons of research out of the Tucker Center at the University of Minnesota on women and girls in sports. There's tons of data and research about what keeps girls out of sports. Puberty is one of those things. So we started running sports classes for girls, and we noticed that the girls in our classes were in puberty like years before we expected them to be. Like we had, second and third graders in puberty. And the people I coach with, social workers, guidance counselors, PE teachers, we were all surprised. And with very little digging, actually, I point to my favorite book about how puberty has changed, of course, besides me and Cara's book, I should say, is a book called The New Puberty by Dr. Louise Greenspan and Juliana Deerdorf, who are researchers about how puberty's moved earlier. So it very quickly became clear puberty's moved earlier. And so as I was coaching these girls, I thought, well, if I want to build their self-esteem, I have to teach them about how their bodies are changing, when their bodies are changing, what happens. And then I have to empower the adults in their lives so they don't say and do things which are just going to tank these girls' self-confidence, inadvertently, but quite possibly.
Oh, and it happens all the time. I mean, I'm a mom and I say things that I'm like, oh, put it back in. Why did that pop out? But it just does. It's like I need your book just by my side all the time as I'm navigating this stage of my kids' lives.
It's so funny. I mean, the biggest thing that we always say is when you mess up, because you will mess up, we all mess up. Even people who host podcasts on wellness and people who host podcasts on puberty, we mess up. And the most powerful thing we can do is take a do-over and to circle back and really own, hey, I said this thing to you yesterday, and I am so embarrassed that came out of my mouth. Can I get another chance to answer your question? Can I get another opportunity to have this conversation with you? And kids love that. I mean, there's nothing they love more than when an adult admits to having made a mistake. It gives them power. It gives them permission to make mistakes because, we're such hypocrites. I mean, Maya, I'm sure you're not a hypocrite, but I'm a hypocrite. And
I'm a hypocrite. I'm a total hypocrite.
so it's like, all through our kids' lives, we're like, it's okay to make mistakes. You learn from mistakes. And then the minute they make a mistake, we're like, the fangs come out and we freak out.
Why did you do it that way?
What were you thinking? How could you be such an idiot? I mean, we say the worst possible things. Whereas if we take a do-over and say, I messed up, I'm owning it, can I have another chance? It shows them, oh, I get a chance to do things over too when I mess up.
Yeah, that's super valid. I'll take it. And I'm going to use that. So thank you there. So since you started in this work, I mean, that's incredible. Like you went in to coach girls and then you actually found that puberty was just happening earlier. What are some of the changes that you've seen in this field of puberty education that have morphed?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because my co-author and co-host and co-everything, Dr. Cara Natterson, is a pediatrician out in LA, and she updated and then wrote the Care and Keeping of You books for American Girl. And so she has been traveling the country for a couple of decades at this point, talking to people about puberty. And what she would say is, she's seen a willingness for people to talk more openly about this stuff, not just the adults, but girls, to hold up their pad in a classroom and say, "Hey, I got to go to the bathroom. I have my period." And all the sort of resources and products available to kids, not just the books now, but the special bras. I mean, we make special bras that are designed for those breast buds that poke out of like literally everything. Like you could be wearing a suit of armor and like those breast buds poke out. It's like, oh my God, could this be any more embarrassing? So I think there's an openness, there's a willingness. I think, frankly, we have like this menopause movement to thank for it. It's normalizing that end of our hormonal journey. And so I think that helps. I think what hasn't changed a lot is that boy puberty is still treated as like a joke and is not sort of seen as something to be taken seriously. I mean, Maya, you can't believe when you tell someone you're writing a book about puberty and they're like, "Oh, it's a book about girls, right?" And you're like, "Why? Because men magically spring from the earth fully formed?" No, it's a book about everybody because everybody goes through puberty. And so I think if someone were to ask me, because I actually have 3 sons and 1 daughter, and if someone were to ask me what I would love to still change, it's that. That boys, their puberty isn't a joke, although it can be quite funny, just as girls' puberty can be funny. But also it deserves love and earnestness and conversations about emotions and explaining the science. I mean, we hear from men all the time who are like, "No one told me what a wet dream was. And I had one. And I thought there was something really wrong with me. I thought I was sick." So I think open conversations for girls has for sure come a long way, which is awesome. I want to see more open conversations for boys. And there's lots of great products, but at the same time, we're in a society where it's hard to tell like what's safe and healthy for kids. So I think some more sort of discernment or a framework for understanding what is actually helpful and healthy for kids at this stage.
And so to that point about like what's healthy for kids, I want to flip the script and bring it to parents because I guess the adults and the caregivers, right? We're kind of the ones that create the framework or set that safe space for them.
Yep.
In your experience, what are some of the concerns that you've seen parents having about their kids entering puberty?
Listen, we live in a society that sexualizes girls from a very young age.
Big time.
Big time. And because the research shows us that Black girls are first to puberty, all of the studies are showing us that even though the average age for girls is between 8 and 9, Black girls are the first group that is studied. Now, they haven't studied every racial and ethnic group, which is a big deal. But Black, Latina, and white girls have been studied. And the issue of sexualization, not just of girls, but of Black girls in our society is so upsetting and so serious. And so when I think about what educators, what parents, what trusted adults can do, it's to not sexualize girls, even though they're developing earlier. Like puberty starts 2 to 3 years earlier than it did when we were growing up, but they're not having sexual urges earlier. They're not interested in activities that we think of as teen activities earlier. And yet the world looks at girls and assumes that because they have the body of a 15-year-old, even though they're 11, that they're sexually interested or should be exposed to things or have discussions about things that are just not appropriate for them. And so that, if I had to give adults the most important takeaway, it is that even if kids look older than they actually are, and often it's girls who look older than they actually are, treat them the chronological age they are, not the age they appear to be to the adult.
So can you tell us a little bit about why that is so important? Kavita and I talked about that in our intro that puberty, just as you said, is coming on significantly earlier. And the way that you characterize the sexualization of girls in terms of their biological change, right? But not chronologically. So why is it so important for adult caregivers and parents to be aware of this difference and that the two are in fact different?
Yes. So the data tells us, and this is corollary data, not causal data, that the early blooming girls, right? The early bloomers are the first 2.5% of kids to go into puberty. They will look much older than their peers and counterparts, and the world will expose them to things. So they are at greater risk for earlier sexual activity, drug and substance abuse, higher rates of anxiety and depression, lower self-esteem. But those are not causal. It is not that earlier puberty causes them to have these experiences. It's that the world treats them as older, holds them to expectations that are not appropriate for a kid their age, puts them in situations that expose them to all sorts of experience, whether it's substances, whether it's sexual activity, which are not safe for them. And if you're a kid, if you're a 12-year-old with the brain development of a 12-year-old and you're exposed to these situations, you're going to react the way a 12-year-old does, which is, the peer influence is very powerful. You may participate or you may find yourself in situations that, really affect your mental health. And so when we talk about how they are related, it's because the world is treating them that way, not because of the sex hormones in their bodies causing them to physically develop earlier, also create these knock-on effects.
That is very sobering, Vanessa. All right, so let's take a break here. When we come back, we'll hear more from puberty educator extraordinaire, Vanessa Kroll Bennett, on her tips of how to navigate this phase of life and support youth going through it. Stick around.
If you love iPhone, you'll love Apple Card. It comes with the privacy and security you expect from Apple. Plus, you earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, which can automatically earn interest when you open a high-yield savings account through Apple Card. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app, subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Apple Card and Savings by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com.
It feels like you can get your credit scores anywhere these days. Random websites, card statements, budgeting apps, heck, even your dog might bark out a few numbers. It's true. Credit Karma isn't the only place you can find them. But we actually do more with your scores to help you find your next financial opportunity. Like a more rewarding credit card, a game plan that helps you pay down debt faster, or a personal loan to help you save more on interest payments each month. Cha-ching! The possibilities are kinda endless. Download Intuit Credit Karma today to get started.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
You're listening to Well Now from Slate. I'm Maya Feller, and we're continuing our conversation with Vanessa Kroll Bennett on navigating puberty. Vanessa, you mentioned that puberty today is different from previous generations. So what are some of the most significant changes that parents should be aware of when they're supporting their kids that are going through this process? And I know that you've mentioned some of the things before, but just because it is so markedly different.
So the easiest way to grasp how it's changed is that puberty starts earlier, it lasts longer, and it happens with a cell phone in hand. And those shifts, and we can, get into the specifics, really encompass the universe of how puberty's changed. And I like to set those shifts in the context of a world in which kids are living under chronic stress, which can have both physiological and emotional impacts on them. So it's both without and within their realities. And Maya, I'm not alarmist. I am not, Chicken Little. Like, I believe in approaching this stage of life with empowerment and joy and optimism, but it's really important to understand how it's different. And then we can move on to like the good parts. So we talked about how it's starting earlier. So on average between 8 and 9 for girls. And I use the term girls and boys, biologically female, biologically male. And for boys, the average age of the onset of puberty is between 9 and 10. And people are really shocked, particularly, they're shocked about all of that data, but particularly about boys. So it's super important for people to know that as we discuss girl puberty, the onset of girl puberty, the first physical sign is breast buds. And those suckers are like, you cannot hide them, right? Like down coat in the winter and you can see the breast buds. It's unbelievable. It's like they're like bionic. But for boys, the first physical sign of puberty is very, very, very slow penile and testicular growth. And it takes a year or two for the testosterone circulating in the body to get the testicles up and running as testosterone machines. But what that means is it's happening slowly to the naked eye, and it's happening when boys are usually getting really private. And so adults don't realize that their boys are in puberty, except maybe the mood swings, but it's evident to everyone that the girls are in puberty. And so when we give those ages, which are not that far apart, the averages are only a year apart, people are really shocked because they think the averages should be much further apart.
That like internal shift versus visible shift that's a lot to even grapple with and like take in as you're talking. And as a parent of both a girl and boy, like I'm thinking back to, did I recognize when my son was going through puberty or did I like miss it? And here we are. And he's now like much taller, much larger, and he looks like a quote unquote man. I bet you there are a lot of folks listening who are doing that same mental inventory.
Yeah. And we hear from parents all the time, like, why is my 10-year-old son acting like a 14-year-old? And the answer is because he's having the hormonal ups and downs in his body and brain that might have happened when we were 14. But these days, those hormonal shifts happen much earlier. And I mentioned Louise Greenspan earlier. She's a pediatric endocrinologist, and she will often say the first sign of puberty is really a slamming door.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I've touched a nerve, Maya. Is this feeling
I'm just going to put my head down and take a deep breath in and go, yes. Yes.
When we speak to audiences, the first thing I do is have them take a deep breath because I know they're coming in with like their shoulders around their necks and they've just had like a massive argument with the kid in their life, like before they walk through the door. And so for parents, like it doesn't actually matter, if you know exactly when a boy starts puberty. It's not like you have to start the clock or something, but it does matter if their behavior and what's going on for them in social emotional ways seems like different or off. Hormones can often explain a lot of what's going on. So I think couple that with how kids' lives have changed so dramatically with the advent of technology, smartphones, iPads, connected schools, all of that adds another layer to their development, and one for which parents are either not prepared or about which parents are absolutely terrified because the news around this has just been devastating to parents and caregivers who feel like they've given kids technology and now they've like ruined their children. So I think there's like I screamed at my kid this morning and I feel bad. And then there's like, I gave my kid a phone and now I've ruined them. And those are two, I think, different perspectives. And I want them to actually come closer together for people as they think about how they can care for kids.
So as we get a bit closer to thinking about how to care for kids, in the book, This Is So Awkward, you talk about the importance of having these small conversations, but many of them, rather than like the one big, we're going to sit down and have that talk, which was like, I don't know, like the days of yore. But, so why this approach of the many small?
I mean, there's two reasons. One, kids are not developmentally able to take on board tons and tons of information at one time. Like Think about how their teachers teach them. Think about how long they can sit at the dinner table without, bouncing up and down. And think about how well they can hear your instructions about please bring your shoes upstairs.
Mhm.
Please put your backpack by the front door, all of those things. So when we get to these really important talks, it's critical that we don't just back up the dump truck and just let everything slide out. Because frankly, Maya, we do that because we're stressed and we just want to get it over with, right? When you think about something you don't really want to do, A, you put it off and put it off. And then B, when you get to it, you just vomit it all out just to get it all over with. But that doesn't help the kids. They can't take it on board. And literally for kids, I'm thinking about third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders, it is a few sentences and you are out. And you can, say a few things and then say, hey, do you have any questions? And some of them do, and some of them don't. And if you have, if you gear up the courage to have a conversation and then a kid is like, nope, I'm good. Don't be devastated. Because what you've really done is you've opened the door to more conversations in the future. You want to be their trusted resource or one of their trusted resources. You want them to know they can come to you with worries, confusion, questions. So it's just about keeping the door open and opening it over and over again so they'll come back to you. Because getting back to technology, we don't want them to go searching things up on the internet. We want them to find trusted resources.
So let's talk about technology since you brought that in, because social media is wild. It is, I'm on it for work, as many of us are, but it is I don't even have a word to quantify its hold and its grasp on adults and children. Talk to us about how social media is influencing, making it harder, all the things. How is social media coming into play here when we're talking about puberty, but also safe spaces for exploration?
We like to remind people that there's actually some really positive things about technology and social media. It's a great way for kids to explore their interests. At those people listening who have budding chefs out there, it's amazing. For kids who are budding news junkies, it's great, although I'll put an asterisk there. For kids to connect with other kids who have similar interests. We know we've done some work with research institutes on the benefits of social media and tech for kids. And what it shows us is kids who are marginalized, so LGBTQ plus kids in a racial minority where they live, they can find other kids like them in other places using tech and social media. So there's lots of great stuff about it. We have to set limits for our kids. And lots of people after the pandemic were like, oh, well, the horse is out of the barn. There's nothing I can do. I gave them X, Y, and Z, and they were on all these platforms. That's never the case with parenting. You can always put the horse back in the barn. You can always take do-overs and reset limits, particularly when it comes to kids' sleep, right? So devices should be out of their rooms at night. Sleep is really, really important. And if you need one way to make that argument, kids grow when they sleep, not when they're in bed, not when they're hanging out on the couch, when they are asleep. And so it's critical, not just for their mood or for their memory, but also for their growth that they get sleep. So devices out of the room. In terms of social media and figuring that out, I really like to be in conversation with kids about what are you interested in? What are you looking at? What's funny these days? Because if we come at them with just total judgment, they're going to shut us out. There is no conversation to be had if we, and I may have said this before in my own house, I'm going to throw that phone out my car window and then I'm going to back up over it so it shatters into a million pieces, right? That's what we want to do because they're not listening to us or they're watching junk or video after video after video. And yes, because those technologies are designed to keep them engaged in video after video after video. Technology is not going anywhere. Look at us. We're zooming across the country. We've got mics, we've got wireless, we've got all this stuff. And it's amazing. We get to now put this podcast out in the world, helping kids figure out buffers, figure out limits, be critical consumers of content. And the scariest thing, and relevant to this conversation, Maya, is how much health information kids are getting from places like TikTok, where it is not scientifically accurate. And frankly, it's often not safe for them.
Oh, I have spent, Vanessa, so many segments debunking X, Y, and Z TikTok myth.
Yes.
And so it's funny because that's where I come to the conversation about social media, is from this really like, I want to back my car up over the phones also.
Right.
And I appreciate this mindset opening of, well, there are these parts that are good or beneficial that can really bring marginalized kids together and also can help kids explore their interests. And I appreciate the layer of, well, as the trusted adult, the same way that we probe about other things, what if we probed about the big, scary social media and then actually got into a conversation with our kids? Who knew that this was the conversation I needed to have today? I'm like, oh my goodness.
That's what I'm here for, to give you a little homework. I mean, it's interesting. Like one of the ways I communicate with my kids during the day, I mean, not when they're in class, but like we send each other funny videos. I mean, my favorite are sloth videos and panda bear videos, but like, everybody does it their own way. But it's a way of like keeping connection with low stakes. And then my kids start sending me stuff. So I get a sense of like what they're watching, what they're listening to. And it helps populate their feed with not just the stuff that they're being sucked into, but also stuff that I might want them to watch and listen to. I don't mean to sound like sort of surreptitious and manipulative. It was sort of a side thing that I realized, that I was like, oh, if I'm sending them pandas and puppies and sloths, that's taking up space on their For You page from other things.
Totally. That's like my son spamming my husband with rock climbing videos.
Right.
And now his feed is all rock climbing videos.
Right. So I think that it's a point of connection. I mean, I have kids in college, and like half of our communication is sending each other funny videos. Here's where the concern is, Maya. And again, like this is something that's in your wheelhouse. The pro-anorexia, kind of pro-eating disorder content that is very easy for kids to access. Instagram has made changes to their teen accounts where they say that's not accessible to kids, but who knows? That's a big concern for boys, where body image is also a huge, huge issue. That's about these supplements and these fad diets and these like kind of bodybuilders about getting jacked and getting big, and the sort of normalization of steroid use. So all around body image for kids of all genders, that is one of the areas that I feel most worried about in terms of social media use.
That makes a lot of sense to me. In your book and in your work, you talk a lot about these emotional aspects of puberty, which actually ties beautifully into what you were just saying, because it's, a highly emotional time for both the children and their trusted adults and their caregivers. So as we close out, talk to us a little bit about how parents can really support their children's mental health during this time of rapid hormonal changes, door slams, and all the things, especially when those changes actually impact how trusted adults, we as parents, adults and caregivers relate to our children.
Right. I mean, when you have a kid who comes home from school screaming and crying and throwing their bag on the kitchen floor, that alerts our nervous system to be frightened, or at least, on attack mode. And so the temptation is to scream back in the face of a screaming child, except they're in the throes of a mood swing. Thank you, estrogen. Thank you, testosterone. We're the adults. Now, some of us may be dealing with our own hormonal swings. Thank you, menopause. Thank you, menstruation. But more often than not, we have learned how to deal with the hormonal realities of being an adult. So we're the adult. It's our job to take the temperature down from a 10 to, ideally a 5. What I find adults often do is they think engaging in the situation is going to help. But in fact, it only just keeps the pot on simmer. And what we want to do is actually disengage, help the kids come down from the mood swing because they don't like how it feels. They're not proud of themselves. It feels embarrassing and out of control and shameful. And so our job is to help take the temperature down. I love Lisa D'Amour, who's a wonderful psychologist, and she says, just say to them, that stinks. And Lisa's from Cleveland. I'm from New York. So I say, that sucks, right? Everybody's got their way of saying it, but validate. Don't solve it. Don't fix it. Don't get involved. Just listen and validate. And the other thing is when we're worried, you mentioned the concerns about the mental health crisis for young people in this country. When we're worried, it's tempting to talk more. Like that's our stress causing us to just keep talking. But when we talk to groups of kids, we just spoke to 100 kids in Maryland and we said, what do you want your parents to know? What can we tell your parents? And they were like, can they just listen more? Like, why are they always just like giving us advice constantly? Like, I just want to tell them how I feel and just have them listen. So we love if people could just listen more and lecture less, that would be awesome. And if you have to say something, just validate, just, make calm, loving murmurs, and also think about redirecting them. Like when they were little and they were a toddler and they were throwing a tantrum, we would redirect them. And so with kids this age, try that, like, hey, let's go walk the dog or let's get a glass of water. Or I love this. It never works with my kids, but I keep trying. I'm like, hey, do you want to braid my hair? And they're like, no. I'm like, really? But I don't get my hair braided, but I sort of jolt them out of whatever they're in, and then they can sort of like take a moment and come back from wherever they are. One question we get a lot, Maya, is how can you tell if it's a mood swing versus a concern about mental health? And if you're ever in doubt about a kid's mental health, go talk to a trained professional, a guidance counselor, a psychologist at school, a therapist. Find somebody who is trained to assess. Back to our earlier point, TikTok is not trained to assess whether your kid has a mental health issue. Your best friend, while super important, is not trained to assess whether your kid is having a mental health issue. But one really important thing to keep in mind is hormonal mood swings happen on the order of hours. So it can be 2, 6, 8 hours, and then things will change. So they might have been in one mood when they left for school in the morning and a different mood when they come home at the end of the day. If the mood is sort of sustained and persistent over a period of days, that is a sign that it could be more than a hormonal mood swing. And that's a sign to an adult to go to a mental health professional for help.
Yep. That is very sound and thoughtful and valid advice. We all want to be seen and heard, myself included. Vanessa, that was such a fantastic conversation. Vanessa Kroll Bennett is a renowned puberty educator, podcast host, and one of the authors of This Is So Awkward, Modern Puberty Explained. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Maya. This was so fun.
That's our show this week. Well Now is produced and edited by Vic Whitley-Berry. Ben Richmond is Slate's Senior Director of Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is Vice President of Audio. We'd love to hear from you. If you have thoughts on this episode or have a wellness story you'd like us to cover, email us at wellnow@slate.com.
If you want to support our work, consider becoming a Slate Plus member. You'll get to listen to Well Now ad-free and receive bonus material from our show and other Slate podcasts. In fact, this week, members have an extra episode of Well Now already in their feed. Maya and Vanessa talk about the Netflix hit Bridgerton and what happened when Vanessa watched an intimate scene with her teenage daughter. But don't worry, if you're not a member yet, you can still listen to the episode by joining Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. To find out more, visit slate.com/wellnowplus. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday as we tackle another part of the wellness industry. I'm Kavita Patel.
And I'm Maya Feller. Thanks for listening.